So in the beginning, you hinted at like the most plausible form of Christianity, Emerson. So in your view, what is the most plausible form of Christianity?
So this started out as kind of a game, like with relay theology, kind of asking. We have this like, if you're an atheist, they'll say, "So what do you think is the most plausible form of theism?" So they sort of like started it off in me, where I was trying to think about, okay, I don't really buy into any form of Christianity, but given the problems that bother me the most. So at first I went with Calvinism because I was like, well, they buy into predestination, which I think is kind of unavoidable. And at least they just bite the bullet, at least they just admit it. And, so that didn't last very long, because I think that it's, you can't really believe in a good God who's like predestining people to hell. Like, that's kind of crazy. Like, he's just, he's merciful, he's good, he's loving, and then he's just kind of like stamping you, it's not even your fault. Like, he's like, yeah, you're going to be tortured forever and you're going to have eternal bliss. Like, that's insane. Like, that's a wild worldview. But I thought, like, at least they just embrace the predestination, because it seems kind of unavoidable to me, because there's this unfair distribution of evidence, and there's this unequal distribution of ability to assess the evidence. And there's this unequal distribution of interest in even looking into this at all. And, depending on the time and place that you're born in, you might not believe kind of rationally, And it seems like pretty much every form of Christianity, most of them at least, your beliefs play some kind of role in what happens to you, like eternally. So I think that's a pretty bizarre criterion to sort of dole out like eternal punishment or eternal bliss. So these kind of soteriological issues weigh pretty heavily on me. And it turns out they weigh pretty heavily on some Christians too. They're called Universalists. So like there are these Universalist Christians like David Bentley Hart or Keith DeRose who say things that sound like they could have come out of my mouth, honestly. Like I'm reading one of David Bentley Hart's books right now, That All Shall Be Saved. And he's talking about the Christian story of the world, if it's the case that people are kind of sent to this everlasting realm of torment, or even just annihilated, eternally separated from God in that way. And just trying to make it all cohere. And he agrees with me where he's like, you can't make this cohere. It literally is incoherent. It's morally and rationally incoherent. And I'm just like, yeah. And then he's just like, but that doesn't mean Christianity is rationally incoherent, because there's this soteriological view that does make all these things cohere, God's justice, his goodness, his love, and our eternal fate. Like, you can at least make it coherent. So I think that requires universalism. So it's not that you'd reject belief in hell. There's still a hell, but it plays a kind of purgatorial role. Like you go there and it's kind of this place of moral purification before you, enter into the presence of God or something like that. And it's not like you're, physically tortured until you submit or something. It's like this, it plays this kind of purgatorial role. So for me, the most plausible form of Christianity is I think your soteriological view has the potential to implode the internal coherence of your worldview. So I think that conditional immortality and eternal conscious torment, they just kind of implode the moral and rational coherence of Christianity. Like, the story makes no sense to me. It's literally impossible for me to believe it. And it's been really strange, honestly, to hear Christians say the same exact thing that I just said. Like, it's been kind of surreal in some ways to like hear Christians say things that I said when I was like a teenager, and things that I'm saying, still now. So, I think that Universalist Christianity that has hell as kind of a purgatorial role where all are eventually saved in the end, I think that can help avoid problems of soteriological confusion where people don't agree about how to get salvation, and problems where, we've got this sort of geographic, powerful predictor for which religious beliefs you tend to adopt, like people who are born in the Middle East are a lot less likely to become Christians. People who are born in the United States are a lot less likely to become Muslims. So the only point there is that there's this like kind of unfair distribution of evidence and this like kind of unfair distribution of ability to assess the evidence. So Universalists kind of just remove this piece where it's like, yeah, whichever beliefs you come to hold, like those play a pretty significant role in determining whether you have eternal bliss or something much, much worse.
Mhm.
So I think that that actually rescues the at least coherence of the story of like an unsurpassably great being of perfect love who wills that all shall be saved.
Mm.
Like I think that if you adopt universalism, then that at least makes it coherent. The other important piece to this, I think, is something that C.S. Lewis and Eleanor Stump convinced me of, which is that in order to have a relationship with God, you don't actually have to have an explicit belief in God. So
Mhm.
it sounds kind of weird, but it kind of seems to follow straightforwardly from like a pretty plain reading of scripture. And like I
Mhm.
said, you can find it in like the fiction of C.S. Lewis and stuff, and it's defended explicitly by Eleanor Stump. It's just the idea that you can be in a relationship with God and not actually know it. So like this would help a lot with the problem of like religious discord and religious diversity, including atheists. It's not to say that all paths lead to God. That's not the point. That's, Christianity is still an exclusivist religion. It's just that you can have a relationship with God, with the true God, without, um, you know, ever uttering the noise Jesus. Like,
Mhm.
so the point is just that, like, in First John 4, God is like identified with love itself, like, in every which way. It could not be like, it really didn't want, like, there's really no room for misinterpreting it there. Like, it just says God is love, and it says it every which way. And traditionally, God is considered to be identical with the good itself. So Eleanor Stump's point and C.S. Lewis's point is just that, look, you can be pursuing the good and serving the highest virtues of love, like, without really knowing anything about Christianity. So, and like, you can be doing things in the name of Christianity and not pursuing the good. And so this is where, Matthew 25 actually makes a lot of sense, the part with the sheep and the goats, where it seems like there are all these people who think that they're Christians, who think that they're followers of Christ, and Jesus is like, no, you're not. And it seems like the converse is also true. Like, there are people who think they are Christians who are not, and it seems like there are people who don't think they are Christians who are, if that makes
Mm.
sense. So like,
Yeah.
people who are following God who don't have explicit knowledge that that's what they're doing. So Eleanor Stump defends this. C.S. Lewis defends this, where at the end of something with Aslan or whatever, and then like the Satan character, I think, is Tash, or maybe he's another
The
guy.
last battle. Mhm.
Yeah. So like, so there's this guy who's like a Tash worshiper, and he's like, so it's the end of history. Aslan has like won the battle and everything, and this guy is like, I'm completely screwed because I've been a Tash worshiper my whole life. And Aslan kind of like welcomes him, and he's like, every time that you served the good, or the highest ideals of love, like, you were doing that in my name whether you knew it or not. And it wasn't for Tash. Like, even though you thought you were doing it in Tash's name, you were actually doing it in my name. And every time
Mhm.
someone does something evil, even if they do it in my name, they're not doing it in my name, they're doing it in Tash's name, because evil belongs to Tash and like goodness belongs to me. And then the guy's like, oh, so does that mean that you have many names and there are like many paths to you? And Aslan is like, no, absolutely not. Like, so this isn't to undermine exclusivism or to say that, like, all paths lead to the same place. Like, it's not like that. It's just saying that, you can be pursuing the good, so you can be in a relationship with God and not know it. To me, that seems like the most straightforward reading of Matthew 25. Like, there are people who think they're following God who aren't, and there are people who don't realize they're following God who are. So I think
Mhm.
that goes a long way towards helping with divine hiddenness and religious confusion and religious disagreement. And yeah, I think that universalism just really helps the whole story kind of cohere. If
Mhm.
we're talking about an unsurpassably great being of perfect love who wills that all shall be saved, and then gives people this unequal access to evidence and ability to assess the evidence, and they're put in this time and place, and then through no fault of their own, they end up not having the right beliefs, and then they're tortured for all of time. That's impossible for me to believe. It seems like morally and rationally incoherent. So yeah, I think there's a version of Christianity that makes sense. I don't think there's a name for it. And by the way, if I were to convert to this version of Christianity that kind of has those like bare features that I just named, I'm pretty sure most Christians would say that I'm not a Christian and not really want to claim me anyway. So
Mhm.
I don't know what would happen even if I were to convert to this kind of universalist form of Christianity that, um, like I said, is still exclusivist, but it can give people the impression that it's not exclusivist, even though I think it's
Mhm.
plainly scriptural. But yeah, like I said, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would hit the not a real Christian button pretty quickly if I were to convert to this form of Christianity. But I think that that's kind of the most plausible form.
I think that's something Christians do too much, just press the not a real Christian button when they come into views that they're uncomfortable with. And obviously, like for me, like I'm a Christian, like there is like an orthodoxy that like must be followed, but like you got to be very careful and like just saying they're not a Christian. So yeah, we're in Emerson, and like everyone would be like, why aren't you a theist, dude? Like, come on, just jump on the train, become that Christian, or I guess according to some, that fake Christian. So what's holding you back from just like embracing theism, I guess, generally?
Well, I mean, the thing that's holding me back from embracing the kind of theism that's like more widely subscribed, like it's sort of the reasons that I just outlined. Like, I think the story is kind of morally and rationally incoherent once you factor in eternal conscious torment or eternal separation. That actually has a lot to do with why I'm incapable of believing the story. And the thing is, that view is way more popular than stuff that David Bentley Hart defends. But if you're talking about why am I not a theist, with the kind of plausible version of Christianity that I just sketched out. So, okay, forget about the vast majority of Christians, just forget about them. What about this version of Christianity that kind of makes sense to you? Pretty much the only thing that keeps me away from that form of Christianity that I sketched out is the problem of evil. So I have lots of objections to theism depending on your soteriological views. But if you happen to accept those kind of fringe views that I just laid out, I don't know what the Eleanor Stump C.S. Lewis view is called exactly, but whatever that view is, and universalism, it's just the problem of evil, basically. Like having an eternal afterlife of a generally positive character for all conscious beings, that certainly helps with the problem of evil. It makes some of the suffering in our world seem less significant because this isn't just the end of the story for the hundreds of millions of years of animal predation, all these animals that suffered and died in horrific ways for seemingly no reason, in ways that totally could have been avoided and contributed to nothing at all. So it doesn't seem as significant, but it's still just like wildly flies in the face of what you'd expect if a perfect being was ultimately responsible for the natural order. The natural order is kind of horrific. It makes more sense to me to say like, oh, that apparently morally random natural order, it is kind of morally random, as opposed to saying there's like this moral rationale behind the suffering that we see in the world. So, I guess that's what it comes down to for me is this works against like all versions of like perfect being monotheism, is like just the idea that there's not really a good rationale behind the kind, degree, and distribution of suffering in the world. In other words, there's not really a successful theodicy. And that really just prevents me from finding this plausible, this theistic worldview. It's just too good to be true. Like if our world was different, then I could be a theist, like if we lived in the world that young earth creationists describe, where the earth is 6,000 years old and there hasn't really been that much animal suffering. And it's all because of the literal fall, there was this literal event called the fall, and then we ushered it. Like, that's not a terrible theodicy. I mean, it just relies on all these, to put it mildly, implausible scientific and historical views. But, once you bring in universalism, and if there hasn't been that much, animal suffering, because the whole universe is only 6,000 years old. What I'm saying is if the world was different, then I would be a theist. But in the world that we live in, it's just very hard for me to make sense of the idea of like a perfect being responsible for the world that I see.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I'm not like totally against eternal conscious torment, though I do find it super hard to see. A lot of the pictures of it are like, I'm like, that makes no sense to me. The only picture I could like maybe see is like if you read like The Great Divorce and C.S. Lewis, like something like that, maybe could strike a tone.
Eternal conscious inconvenience or something. It's like eternal conscious mild irritation. It's not really.
Well, I mean, the way Lewis describes it, I'm sure. Are you familiar with Lewis's description of like?
I've just heard it secondhand from a couple of people who've told me about it. Yeah.
So it's like, like hell's a world where you can kind of just get wherever you want, and like hell's locked from the inside. So it's not like God's like created like this big torture chamber or anything like that. I mean, there's some plausibility, but then you wonder, like, if there's a perfect being, like, why would he create that world? Like, where you could have a world where, like, evil is actually, like, defeated. And it seems to me
Yeah.
like if evil is going to be defeated, like, you need at least, like, annihilationism. And, like, obviously, I'm a hopeful universalist. Like, I don't want anyone to go to hell. Like, whew, I can't imagine doing that.
Well, why do you hope for it?
Because it seems like the best possible scenario where everyone and everything is reconciled to God. Like, what sounds better than that? Like, to me, like, that seems like and I have
Right.
issues, there's like biblical data and things like that. But to me, like, just like thinking about it, like, just off the cuff, like, to me, that's the most hopeful scenario, is to hope everyone is reconciled to God. So,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, it seems like if you're a hopeful universalist, then you're conceding that it's the best possible outcome. And
Mhm.
but then you're worried that this perfect being is not going to bring about the best possible outcome. You're like,
Mhm.
oh well, I mean, yeah, he's a perfect being, but we all know what he's like, you know. It's like, no, if it's the
He has
best
that bad side
outcome,
on like once a week. So, he's getting out.
I mean, if it's the best possible outcome, then it seems like you should be more confident that God would bring it about. I mean, like, why would he bring about something less than what he could bring about? I mean, it seems like it's within his power to save everyone. Like
Mhm.
that whole idea of like hell being locked from the inside, like that just makes no sense to me, because if it's really terrible, then you would want to leave. And like if the idea is, well, look, they just won't submit to God, or they won't submit to the good or something like that. Well, if God is a perfect being, then all it really takes is him revealing himself to like people, maybe in different ways or like to different extents. But if God is the way that he's described, then he's totally irresistible. So all it
Mhm.
really takes is God revealing himself to these people, and they would happily, willingly enter into a relationship with him. So it's within his power to save everyone, and we know that he wills that all shall be saved, and it's the best outcome. So it just seems like, well, of course, this is what would happen. Like the idea that hell is locked from the inside. It's like, I mean, first of all, if hell is locked from the inside and it's kind of torturous, it's insane to will yourself to be tortured. You know, you're not really rationally willing your best interests at that point, and it's wrong to let insane people have themselves tortured. You know, which you'd have to be to lock the door from the inside in hell. And even if
Mhm.
it's like it's not so torturous, but it's still, you know, it's just not great, or whatever Lewis was talking about. It's like, well, look, it's within God's power to save everyone just by revealing himself, because he's this totally irresistible being. He's perfect love and goodness itself. Like all it takes is having a more accurate understanding of God. And you wouldn't see it like how Christopher Hitchens sees God, like as Big Brother or something. Like the
Mhm.
more accurate your understanding of God becomes, if God is literally like a perfect being of love, then the more you came to understand God, the more you would really want to be in his presence and like in a relationship with God. So it seems like it's within God's power to save everyone, and he wants everyone to be saved. So, you know,
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something there, and like I would like if someone asked me like where I'd stand on like eschatology and stuff right now, it'd probably be like some form of like annihilationism and hopeful universalist or something like that. But I mean, I do think like it's like with just defending eternal conscious torment, which is super hard to do. Like I'm not like, oh, this is an easy view to defend by any means. Like it's definitely really tricky, and I think
mhm,
yeah, biblically too. I think there's issues with it, a lot of issues with it. But I mean, you could say something like the story of like say someone who's like a drug addict in this life.
mhm,
Surely they know that like not being a drug addict is like a better thing than like staying in the current state they are. But just by the way their nature is, like they can't escape that. And I mean, you
mhm,
could appeal and say, look, God's a perfect being. He's unlimited. It's like, it's not a totally analogous scenario, which I think there's something right about that. But for me, I don't know. I still think there's something where you could have some form of eternal conscious torment, and not, and like have it, like have a defense for it. But I don't know if it's how good it would be is my question. So that's why I don't hold the ECT. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's just hard for me to make it work. I don't understand how it just seems kind of bizarre, honestly. Like,
Hmm.
but yeah, it had a lot to do with me deconverting initially. It's just thinking about the story of Christianity. Like, if you just ask your average Christian, like, "Hey, what's going on?" like with
Hmm.
life on Earth and stuff. Like, the story for me is just like really hard to believe. And there have been some people who have done a decent job of kind of explaining why the story strikes so many atheists as hard to accept, you know, like
Hmm.
people like Dan Barker. He has this one thing called like The Good News, this like short story. And then there's Scott Clifton,
Hmm.
who um has this thing called God's Checklist 2.0. I don't think he would stand by some of these things because they were made a long time ago, but I really like that video. I loved, you know, when I was first deconverting. But yeah, I think that it's possible to answer these questions. You just have to kind of take these fringe positions, you know, and a lot of Christians will not be very happy if you do this, and they're going to say that you're not a real Christian, and they're going to, you know, I mean, obviously there is a scriptural basis for universalism, you know, like David Bentley Hart and like Keith DeRose, they, you know, it's not like they're just ignoring the Bible, like, you know, they know their stuff, but
well, it's been good. Anything else? I mean, we kind of covered everything. I know you're a theist now, so you can just admit it right now, and I can clickbait this and just get all kinds of like cool stuff going on.
Yeah.
So I'm ready. Anytime.
Yeah, like I said, I'm trying to take Christianity and theism, like I'm trying to like steelman it. Like this is kind of like my this is the last hurrah here where I'm just like, okay, I really have to, I found this version of Christianity that actually might be true, you know, like it actually seems like it's way more plausible than the other versions, which I'm literally incapable of believing. But like so, and I've only started thinking about this recently, like in the last like several months or so. So I'm trying to be open to it. So, you know, I feel like I'm not really approaching this in good faith. If ahead of time, I already know what the outcome is going to be. But I haven't really thought about universalism up until the last, you know, several months or so. And I've been reading about it and just trying to, you know, remain open and not be a resistant non-believer, you know, like I want to look into this like universalist form of Christianity with an open mind and be like, hey, you know, I dismissed this when I was deconverting because I didn't take it seriously because no one I knew took it seriously. Like even annihilationism was way too like liberal, you know, when I was like a Christian, like that wasn't taken seriously at all. And let alone this like universalist crap. And then like, you know, so, but, you know, I just gradually became exposed to Christians who took it seriously. They're sincere Bible believing Christians, you know, and they're universalists. And so I have to admit, it does sidestep a lot of my objections. Like I just had a debate with John Buck where I defend atheism, and you know, like, look, universalism in the kind of Lewis Stump view that I was talking about, like it does kind of seriously diminish my case and leave me with almost nothing but the problem of evil. And that's basically it. So I'm trying to approach this universalist Christianity, you know, this is kind of like my current investigation, approaching it with an open mind with the possibility that I might convert, because if that's not a possibility, then why bother doing it if you're not truly open? So no, I am looking into Christianity, into universalist forms of Christianity, and there's a real possibility that I could become a Christian at the other side of this. But if this doesn't work out, I think I'm pretty much done with thinking about Christianity seriously. But yeah, and then like I said, on the other path, psychophysical harmony has kind of forced me into taking these kind of Nagel type views more seriously about natural teleology, where there is this kind of tendency towards states of value, but not too strong, because the natural world is pretty morally random. So that's kind of where I'm at in my journey at this particular moment. But you know, I'm really glad you had me on and stuff. You're one of the Christian YouTubers out there that I have like genuinely positive feelings towards and stuff. And yeah, so I enjoy talking to you, or in today's case, talking at you for 90% of the time. But yeah, no, I thanks for having me on, and we'll see where this goes.
Well, yeah, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you, because it seemed like through the courses you're very open. It's not like you're really trying to sell anything to anyone. You're just like kind of like, here's where I'm at. Because I know probably maybe like some of your listeners, like I have such a weird how I listen to YouTube videos and stuff, but I listened to like a couple weeks ago your like episode on like free will and determinism from like 4 years ago or whatever. And I'm like, that is not the Emerson Green I listened to that from like now, or the one I'm talking to right now. And it shows like, and I think it's good that stuff's there, because it shows like for you, and I hope for people listening to me, you can see a similar thing. Like this is a journey. It's not like we have it all figured out and we spend the next 100 years. Well, if we live to 100, that's kind of rough. But like it is like we don't have it all figured out. Like we're very open and like saying like, hey, this is our journeys. And like for me, you talked about like how you growing up in church, like annihilationism and universalism were seen as like not even options. And for me, like it wasn't pushed on me, but like my natural like assumptions growing up in like an evangelical world was like, yeah, those things are crazy. You can't believe that. And like over time, like I've seen them as more and more plausible. Like universalism, like philosophically to me, makes a lot of sense. Theologically is where I have all my issues. And I know like David Bentley Hart has there's responses, but for me, that's when I have issues. But all to say, like life's a journey and we're going to get it figured out. And like, you're okay sometimes. So yeah.
Oh, thank
I'm
you.
just kidding. Your channel is great. I love your channel. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is a journey, and like, I have, 2, maybe even 3 beliefs that I currently hold that are not true, and I look forward to figuring out what they are. But
Well, I only have one, so you got to get it. You got to get your stuff together, man. Come on. But yeah, it's been great, Emerson. Thanks for coming on. And your channel will just be literally added in this YouTube title, assuming YouTube wants to function when I upload this video. And yeah, that's it. So it's been great, man. Thanks for coming on, and we'll talk after the broadcast ends. For everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this, and God bless.